Good morning and welcome to this new parent webinar. Today we'll be looking at resilience during COVID-19 and that all important bounce back factor. So my name's Nikki Stewart. I'm a school counsellor. I use an integrative approach with my clients. I offer inset training and I'm a wellbeing lead at your school, as well as a Mental Health England and youth instructor. I also offer clinical supervision. So let's look at what we're going to cover today. Today we're going to be looking at what is resilience. We're going to acknowledge that there have been COVID-19 losses, not just loss of life, but losses of everyday experiences. We'll be looking at resiliency factors and also helping children, your children, to bounce back from these losses. So first of all, I just want to start off by saying that there is a trigger warning here. This webinar will be talking about loss and grief. So if this is something that you're experiencing at the moment or you've been through your own bereavement recently, then please take care of yourself. Self-monitor and self-regulate. So if you need to leave or switch the video off, please be mindful of your own needs here. Okay, let's look at what is resilience. If you put resilience into Google, you'd come up with a million different responses. Really is the process of handling stress and how children are going to recover from trauma and adversity. So first of all, before we look at resilience, we need to acknowledge what losses we've been through as a community, as families, as individuals. So there is grief involved with the COVID-19 pandemic, and we are mourning what we are missing. And a clinical psychologist here, Dr. Robert Weiss, said, "Today we are all grieving. We are grieving the loss of our freedoms, a predictable future, and the lives and the roles left behind in our communal rush away from the coronavirus." So it's important that we acknowledge those losses. So again, I just want to reiterate, it's okay not to be okay at the moment. Everybody's going through different experiences. And as we've said before in the previous webinar, we may be all in the same storm. This is a saying that's quite a lot at the moment, but we're not in the same boat. So it's important you take notice of how your boat feels and what the weather's like in your sea. So let's look at some data here. There was a research done by the FORSO on behalf of Save the Children. It looked at how children and families are coping and their concerns during the coronavirus crisis. So the top concerns were really, they don't know how long it's going to last. And the outcomes there were parents really were 64% were worried about that and 60% of children. I think the main statistic here that stands out is the not seeing their friends. So for parents, it's 48% of parents were concerned, but 85% of children were concerned of not seeing their friends. And that's the data that stands out for me in this piece of research, because being away from school has meant disconnections for many of your children, disconnections from their routine, from their friendships, from their teachers, from being part of a community. And this is what we're going to have to repair and make time to repair during our reintegration of pupils. So children thinking, they are thinking they miss their friends, they're a bit bored, they are enjoying having time with their family. 38% of children said that, 13% do feel lonely and 7% do feel scared. So it's important again to acknowledge that we will all have different experiences throughout this crisis. So it's normal for us to feel grief. Now, this is a collective grief we'll be feeling as a community, so we're all going to be recovering from this together. Talking can help, such as a therapist. You can connect with me, friends, family, and again, fellow community members, because once again, going through collective trauma and grief is something that we will all be experiencing, but experiencing in different ways. So a nice graphic here to acknowledge that it's okay to grieve. We're all grieving different things. It may be that you've had a holiday cancelled, a baby shower, children's end of year celebrations, the child's birthday parties, your freedoms, time with loved ones, even weddings. I know that many people have had to cancel their weddings or postpone weddings. And even the birthing plan may be different to how if you were expecting during this period. And even people that are on furlough, they won't be having a regular, stable paycheck. So it's important to acknowledge that sense of grief and how it feels for us as a community. And while this grief isn't through bereavement, through loss of life, it's still a loss. So I don't want to underplay that really, and also to acknowledge that if you are going through a bereavement, that is very tough. Loss of life and grief through loss is very, very painful. So be mindful of your own needs here. So we are experiencing, and your children will be experiencing, that loss of group and community shared experiences, especially through sport. And we know at our school particularly, we do play a lot of sport. We take part in a lot of community activities, and all of that stopped as soon as lockdown began. So there's a lovely graphic here by Dr. Karen Treisman, and she is a clinical psychologist, author and trainer. And she talks about looking at trauma and how it impacts communities. So if we're thinking in terms of adversity, people have gone through different experiences. So there could be that we're thinking of people that have lost their life through COVID, people that are feeling lonely or trapped or disconnected, helpless, powerless, all different experiences. They may be living in fear, overcrowding situations, maybe the carers that have had to go in and carry on. People have been separated. So it's important we acknowledge all of those different experiences. Some people have been home safe, others haven't been. And all of those losses and struggles and situations are really difficult to internalise and understand. It's important we have empathy here. So there are 5 stages to our grief. Now, this was a model postulated by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She did originally put it in place for people that were experiencing a terminal illness, but this has been adapted and used in many different areas of life, and it can be a good model for change. So it goes through stages of denial, anger, bargaining, despair, acceptance. And we know that if we're starting to feel that way, remember we're all going through this, but it is an individual togetherness. We are having collective trauma, but you will experience it differently. So your grief journey and your children's grief journey may be different, and that's okay. Grief is very individual. And as I speak about grief, grief is a word that we use and we express a sense of loss. And that isn't just through loss of life, it's loss of lifestyles, loss of community. So it's important to acknowledge again that our grief journeys will be very different. Not everybody will be the same. So have a look at this graphic and see if any of those words sort of jump out at you. Anything there you can relate to, because your journey will be different from your children's. And it's important to acknowledge what you're going through as parents as well, because everybody will be experiencing some form of loss. So again, throughout this period, it might be times that it's felt okay, it's normal, and then times it sort of really hits you and think, oh gosh, this is overwhelming. But again, be easy, take it gently with yourself. You're doing the best you can as parents. Remember that you are your child's real healthy attachment figure. They'll take a lot of example from how you're feeling, how you're coping with it, and it's okay to have not okay days. And let them see that, let them understand that we're all feeling the same and that it's going to be okay. Give them that sense of security and comfort and regulation. So Bessel van der Kolk talks about the parent-child connection is the most powerful mental health intervention known to mankind. So don't underestimate just being there, being present, being consistent with your children and allowing them to see that the emotion is okay, the feelings they are expressing is okay, and that we're all going through the same thing. So that sense of connection between you and your child is very powerful. So Lois Tonking talks about the growth around grief. Now this is a really good model for anybody that is going through any loss or bereavement themselves. So you can see here on the left there, the expectation of grief is that, okay, it's not there, you don't experience grief before loss. But then the loss is all encompassing. It becomes this big black hole. And the expectation is that the black hole will get smaller and life will return to as it was. But the reality is your grief does not shrink, it does not fade. What happens is that you grow around that loss. And that is how we experience resilience. It's the jar. If you look at figure 3 on the jar here with this image from Curie's bereavement, it talks about how we grow around the grief. So our capacity for life increases, but our grief stays the same. And it's important again to acknowledge that everybody's going to experience grief differently. So how can we tell if our children are grieving? What shows up? You might find that it's difficulty in concentrating. They might be having problems getting to sleep. There could be a more cleanliness, there could anxiety be shown. And we've covered this in our previous webinar on how we can explore anxiety with our children and support their feelings of anxiety. We could see them go back developmentally. They could go back to sort of regress in terms of needs, and you might sort of see more infantilized behavior. They may go back to those toddler years. They may sort of have more tantrums. You could see changes in how they play, and we talked about that in our previous webinar, how children use a sense of play and metaphor in their own work and how they can let their feelings out in the safety of their play. And sometimes there is experiences of guilt, you know, is this my fault? Children do internalize a sense when there is a gap and of unknown information. So if they don't understand something, the question will always be, is this my fault as a child? So it's important to reassure them, even if they don't verbalize that, that this period is nothing to do with them. It's a virus and we're all accepting of the fact that we're having to be home. So again, some really nice graphics here. We covered this in our anxiety webinar. Have a look at the National Children's Bureau. This is the Children's Grieving charity. And it's really good graphic here for the children to tick or for you to use. We may have family members that have been ill and we might not have been able to visit them. We've been isolated. So it's good to really foster a sense of connection, really, and how we can think about that person. So there's some just suggestions on this sheet. For example, you could listen to music that they like or eat their favourite food, just to remind you of that sense of connection. And send them something to hug and think of them. So write letters, foster those connections and keep that going. So this is ideas for you to help you with your own grief, if that's through bereavement or loss. So you can help by telling people what helps you, what makes you feel safe, and share with others what you would like to start thinking about. And remind yourself that sleeping is important. It's important to look after your needs in terms of physical needs and well-being. So this is something you could give to your children, and your children then are able to tick a box on this sheet and then give it to you or a carer and just say what they need in terms of their own grief. And this is about grief through bereavement. So if someone has been lost in your family, they might say they would like you to help them start a memory box. They might need a hug. They might want to keep in touch with other family members. So this is a way for you to open that communication channel between you and your child if you have gone through that sense of loss. Now, art activities are really great for exploring a sense of grief, and this is grief through bereavement. So paints are amazing. If you have poster paints at home, if you have anything with colours in it, it's really good for children to choose a colour that represents a feeling. Now, grief can be made up of many different feelings. It can be confusion, guilt, sadness, loss. So it's really important to ask them to choose a colour that goes with the feeling. And as you can see here in this graphic, what's happening is the paint becomes mixed, and then the children are looking then at how that paint colour goes when it gets mixed together and how their grief can really represent in that colours in those paints. There's a nice idea here in terms of memory stones. I use this a lot in my own therapy room, where children can choose a stone that represents the different memories they have of that person they've lost. And it could be that they hold a precious stone that reminds them of all those precious memories. It could be a rough stone that holds the difficult feelings and memories. And then an everyday stone for things that they have to get done in the day. They have to carry on with schoolwork and they have to carry on with life. So those three stones can represent how they cope with their loss. And maybe one day the rough stone can be really heavy, it can be sharp. Maybe one day the precious stone can be really bright and shiny. So it will change from day to day. And they can hold each stone and tell you how they're feeling with their stone in their hand. And all the talk comes about the stone then, so the children can then project the feelings of that stone onto the object and how they're feeling around their grief that day. So as we've acknowledged those losses and those griefs, it's important that we then think about how we're going to bounce back. And bounce back resiliency depends on those individual level traits. And we've looked at this graphic before in a previous webinar. So it depends on the children's own traits, your family characteristics, and how we as a community come together. So there's going to be risk factors and there's going to be protective factors. And if we can put in place as many protective factors as we can, we're going to support children in that all important bounce back factor. So the most key really thing is effective relationships, how we connect, building on their current strengths and allowing them to manage their emotions and thinking resiliently. This is a really lovely video. If you get a chance, have a look at this on YouTube. This was a grade 1 pupil in America. He was asked to draw this butterfly. He copied it. The image you see in the top left there is his first attempt. Now, through coaching, through reflection, through looking at himself and his skills and confidence, he was able to go back each time and retry using what he heard as a response. Every time he tried a different method until you get to the final image in the bottom right. Now this is the same student, same pupil, but he's gone on and tried and tried and tried again. This is resiliency in action. This is what we see. It's okay to get it wrong. It's okay to make mistakes. And Austin's butterfly is a really good example of this. And it's really nice to show your children this video. So if you can, have a look on YouTube, Austin's butterfly. And again, the message from this, ask them what they take from it. What do you get from this video? What do you notice about Austin? How did Austin feel at the beginning when he drew his first butterfly? And what did Austin keep doing? And how did he feel when he got to his final end goal? So it's a really nice reflection exercise, this one. So some tips for you to build resilience in your children. Really to spend good quality time with them. They feel that sense of connection and feeling loved and valued. And don't rush to solve the problems. We've talked about this. Allow them to make mistakes and give them time to work it out. We spoke about this in a previous webinar when we looked at we as parents we have a need and a want to make things right for our children. But it's okay. You have to give children that space to make their own resolutions. And acknowledge your own mistakes and teach your children from that. We all make mistakes. Parents aren't immune to mistakes. It's good for children to see that and learn from it. And ensure that they're getting the right amount of sleep, exercise, and just the basics. Mental health is based around, and good mental health is based around those basics of sleep, diet, and exercise. So good, talk about your own feelings as well, and we'd be willing to share and hear their worries. So when children experience that failure, it's important to praise their efforts. Now, we talked about this and we talked about happy children and those pillars of positive psychology when we spoke about Martin Seligman's well-being theory. It's important to look at the negative emotions as well as the positive. So if your children can't find a solution to the problem, you can use gentle questioning. We talked about this in terms of relating and regulating the children. So this is a lovely resiliency framework. It's the work of Brighton University, and they've looked at how resiliency can be applied. So there's lots of talk of resilience in terms of how academically we can apply resilience, but practical application is not really researched. And what happens is this resiliency framework is a basis of how we can apply this to our children. And it's the work of Professor Angie Hart and Kim Orman. So have a look at this. It's Boing Boing is the community interest company that was started by these two, and it's grown. It involves parents, families. There's lots of members of the community that are involved in this resiliency framework. So if we look at it in terms of the basics, it's a bit like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We need those basic needs met before we can go on and grow in terms of our self-growth. So good housing, we've got money, we feel safe, we've got transport, we have a healthy diet, we've got exercise, enough sleep, we've got hobbies, and we don't feel that we're being judged, so we're in that unconditional positive regard environment. So a sense of belonging, how we learn and how we cope, so understanding right from wrong, and then the core self at the top. Instilling a sense of hope, and hope is really important in part of recovery and resilience. And know and understand yourself, take responsibility for yourself, and find time for your talents. So all of this resiliency framework can be applied to how we bounce back from this trauma. So have a look at the Boing Boing website. There's got some amazing information and support for parents there as well. And it's all about, Professor Angie Hart talks about It's all about internal resources as well as external environments. So it's not just about the traits your children have, it's all those all important relationships that give you a sense of connection. So remember that it's important that we have connections that allow our children to bounce back from this trauma. And this is applied a family version. So again, the basics: belonging, learning, coping, and how we understand our core self. So if you want to pause the video here, you can have a read through that slide. So at school, you know that we follow the 5 ways to well-being, which was a piece of research that looked at how we can give, take notice, connect, keep learning, and be active. And we run our Buzz Club at school, looking at the 5 ways to well-being and giving children choices of how they access well-being. Well-being is something we can't teach, it has to be felt. So it's important we give the children a menu of things that they can attend to their well-being. The Action for Happiness movement, if you haven't heard of Action for Happiness, have a look at their website, actionforhappiness.org. They talk about this in terms of the great dream. So it takes the 5 ways to well-being and it sort of increases that in terms of how we give, relate, exercise, how we've got awareness, how we like to try new things, and having a sense of direction, bouncing back with that resilience, emotions, accepting and meaning. And this can be applied to almost Martin Seligman's PERMA as well. So we'll think about that a bit later in another slide. So allow yourself, again, as parents, access to how you're going to look after your own well-being. So we talked about this in our anxiety webinar, how children are going to bounce back. Good coping skills, let them choose what works for them. It's a bit like that feelings toolbox that we spoke about. What works for them? Maybe they like to read, to do some good breathing exercises or some mindfulness. And we know Mrs. Ricknell's provided the children with some fantastic mindfulness exercises to do in the Teams accounts. Label the feelings, talk about it, name them. Explore them within the body. We've spoken about interoception and how children can really name that feeling and see how it feels within inside them. Positive self-talk, so reframing that, having those positive thoughts that will affect positive feeling and in turn subsequent positive actions. Having games together and doing some cosmic yoga online or artwork. We know that being creative again is great for our well-being, and I'm a great believer in the power of art and play. So you know, online we have our YouTube channel at school. You can access the Buzz Club videos. So again, these are really good ways for children to express that sense of bouncing back. One of the great ways is to write down feelings, create a feelings journal to reflect on that journey in terms of their own emotions and well-being. And it's okay for that feeling to go up and down all day long. And how we're going to soothe ourselves with creating a little box of calm. And Mrs. Ricknell's mindfulness videos. So have a look at all of those. They're really good for in terms of well-being and bouncing back. Now, one of the great ways that children grow resiliency is through playing outside and being active. Now, at the moment, we know we can't sort of let them to get too close to one another, so we are socially distancing, but it's still really important they go outside and have fun. And we know that that can decrease stress, increase self-regulation, and increase that sense of resiliency. So as much as you can, get your children outside, having fun in the garden or outside, bicycle rides, walks, whatever you can do. So through play, children can learn to become more resilient. Play is really important for growing, developing a sense of resiliency and how we work through uncertainty. And it does help them make sense of difficult situations or feelings, helps them make sense of the world. It helps them learn how to manage their emotions. And it does help them really express different range of emotions. And it helps them feel connected to others. So really, if you can, encourage as much play as possible, no matter what the age of your children. It's important that we all can play and can be playful as well. And we've spoken about this in the importance of play webinar. So this, I really like this in terms of Stuart Sanker. He talks about 5 steps of self-regulation. So we've spoken about co-regulation. Self-regulation is allowing the children to regulate their own emotions, and we do that through being able to reframe what we see as a behaviour. We respond to that. We also recognise their stresses, and we can reflect and enhance any sort of stress awareness. and we can reduce those stresses. So Dr. Stuart Shanker says he wants every child to thrive and embrace the gift of life. He wants every child to have the opportunity and the resources, as well as to realise their gifts and to deal with the challenges that are part of life. And he wants the same for every family, school and community. This is a really lovely movement. And self-regulation is based on the foundation of healthy human development in terms of mental health, resilience, learning, emotional safety, and caring relationships. So we've all can play a part in that, in helping children with their own self-regulation skills. So again, self-regulation using Blobtree. We talked about Blobtree before, it's an intervention tool, as well as being mindful of where they are on the emotional mood ladder. This is some of the tools I use in the therapy room, so it's really good for them to be able to explore how they're feeling. So this Blobtree here has been adapted for our coronavirus lockdown period. I've added a couple of blobs, so you can see J there in the distance, it's isolating. You can see A and D blob there, I've got face masks on. So again, it's seeing how the children are, checking in with them. And there's no right or wrong answer on this blob tree. Every blob is valid. It's just about acknowledging where the blob is and how the blob's feeling and what blob needs. And again, it's don't be frightened of asking these questions and hearing the answers, because we'll just give the children the space to regulate themselves. So again, where are you feeling on the mood ladder yourselves today? So one, we start off sort of calm, happy. As we go up the mood ladder, it becomes maybe a bit tired, a bit worried, a bit sad, a bit scared. And then we maybe become sad, and then we get to the top here where there's no returning really. We have to go up and discharge. And people deal with angry feelings in different ways. It can be internalized and hidden. It can be expressed. It depends how you've experienced anger growing up and how you internalize anger within your family environment. So it's subjective. It's really important we let children let anger out in a really positive way. So a path to resilience. So again, scientifically backed up methods of how you can help develop a sense of resilience in your children. So breathing, that's really important, that sense of breathing. We can shallow breathe, but as soon as we've become deep breathers and we really notice our breath, it really sort of calms and regulates us. And set small goals with one another. What can we do? Let's do something fun together. And reframe that thinking. So if they are having a worried feeling, acknowledge it, reframe it, change it, make it positive action. And practice gratitude. We know that we've covered this in one of our previous webinars, where just mentioning 3 good things that have happened in a day is really proven to increase our sense of well-being. So these are some lovely graphics from the World Health Organization. You can get these online if you want them. So COVID-19 parenting. So the World Health Organization recognizes it's important that we have one-to-one time with our children. So try if you can to spend some time with each of your children. I know it's difficult in the circumstances where most of us are working at home or you've got other demands on your time, but if you can, try and spend at least 20 minutes a day. There's some ideas there to do with your baby or your toddler, ideas for your children. If you have teenagers at home, connect with what they're having, get into their world. And some ideas there with your young children. And it's about really having some non-screen time. So maybe switch off phones, computers, televisions, and spend some time just sort of having fun with them. That be reading, drawing, painting, dancing, something that really connects all of you. And structure, again, we've talked about structure. There's obviously us returning to school, so we need to think about how we're going to change that structure. And it's really important to acknowledge that the changes will bring about some anxieties, and that change curve we'll talk about a bit later. But it's important we start modelling that. So if you are going to be returning to school with your children, look at it. How is it going to be? Rehearse that with them in their minds. Go through the story of the day. Look at how they're going to feel. So it's important to have hope and things to look forward to. So ask your children, what's going to be the first thing they're going to do when we're out of lockdown? What have they missed most about school? Is there any activities they can't wait for? So have those hopeful conversations with your children. It's really good to have a sense of hope through all of this. Again, there's a lovely worksheet here. This is available on the Teamers channel for your children. It is in the Buzz Club, so if children want to do this with you at home, it's really nice to go through. So this is a graphic I've produced here looking at circles of control. Now, this is a really good way to look at how we can focus on our green circle. So some of the time when anxiety is around, it's because children are focusing on the orange circle. So I'm not sure how long this will go on for. Other people aren't following the rules. I don't like how they're feeling. I'm not sure how they're going to play. I'm not sure of other people's ideas, what the weather's going to be like, what words they'll use. So those can be anxiety inducing. So what we can do is help our children focus on the green circle, the things they can control. And that sometimes will help them regulate and feel less anxious. So they can control their thinking, they can control their positive thoughts, they can control washing their own hands and keeping themselves safe. They can control being kind to themselves and to others, and how they really adhere to their own social distance and asking for help if they need it. So focusing on the green circle in this can really bring the anxiety levels down. So go through this graphic with your children. It's really good to be able to explore that, things they can control and things that are outside of their control. So the coping wheels, we talked about this in the previous webinar. What's in your feelings toolbox? What do they need? What helps them? What regulates them? Get them to ask and look inside their own toolbox. So for you as parents as well, so what can you control? What can't you control? So check in with yourself there. How are your anxiety levels? Bring yourself back into that inner circle. You can control all of those, limiting your social media, finding things to do, turning off the news. And we know sometimes that scrolling through a social media feed can be very anxiety inducing. So take notice of that as parents as well, how you look after your own well-being and mental health. So Action for Happiness produce a monthly calendar. This month it's called Joyful June, even though we're in difficult times. So have a look at the date. I invite you to print these off of the website, have them up at home, even make your own calendars. You can have a daily activity as a family. It's quite a fun thing to do. So see how you can increase and induce more happiness in your own home environments. So this is a lovely graphic from Dr. Chris Moore. He talks about the PERMA model, and we spoke about this in our Happy Children webinar, and we looked at Martin Seligman's PERMA model. So his well-being theory of how to apply well-being in everyday life. And Dr. Moore's taken this and actually put in some actions that we can all do. So how do we apply PERMA to our everyday life so we can have positive emotions? What makes us feel good? So there's a lovely list there of all the things that you might try to sort of induce those positive emotions. Engagement, so what flow activities make you lose track of time? And Martin Seligman talks about flow in terms of that engagement. So maybe sometimes you might do yoga, meditation, and you lose that sense of time. Writing a story, you might really get into a story and then lose track of time. So have a look at how you induce those moments of flow. Relationships, who brings you joy, peace and comfort and support? So catch-ups, getting to appreciate your work colleagues, sharing photos. There's a lovely list of practical ideas there. Meaning, so what causes and pursuits, where do you find meaning? And again, making that's through charity donations, sharing knowledge with one another, commemorating loved ones. Have a look what brings you meaning. And that sense of accomplishment, which is what Martin Seligman talks about in terms of the pinnacle of well-being theory. So what are your goals and how can they be achieved? So it's simple things like making a to-do list, looking at how you're responsible, how you can change the role, make things different at home, do some DIY projects. There's lots of different ways to feel a sense of accomplishment there. So we use Dr. Moore's graphic, and he's got that available at epinsight.com. So again, as I bring the webinar sort of to a close, it's important I go back to this trauma recovery. The recovery model is holistic. It's based on that person-centered approach. Your children will bounce back. We will bounce back. And that will be through all of what we've just spoken about in this webinar. There's no one quick fix. It will be a combination of things. So it's how we connect with one another and how we respond to what's gone on. So it is possible to recover, and it's the most effective recovery is through person-centered, healthy, reparative relationships. And again, it won't last. This too shall pass. Remember that. So it won't last forever. So thank you so much for listening. As always, there's continued support available. Please access the website you see here. And I look forward to seeing you for our next parent webinar. Take care of yourselves and remember to keep bouncing. And here's the list of references for anybody that wants to access any further information. And it's been my pleasure to spend some time with you today. Thank you for listening.